As I reflect back on the journey of my life, I think about how God directed me to Kampala for that workshop. I had a burden for my church to give from their hearts and not out of duty. But I never thought it would take such a horrible situation for me and my town to realize that we all needed to change.
In 2001, the ADF army overtook many regions of western Uganda, forcing over 80,000 survivors into the turmoil and destitution of refugee camps. As the war raged on, hope along with the moral fiber of the people faded. But there was one who chose to inspire through generosity and gracious giving, and this is his story.
My name is Hannington Bahemuka, but most people call me Bishop Hannington. The life in the camps was very bad because families would crowd in the shack houses, children would go without food for 1, 2, 3 days, water was not available, and death started resulting within a short time.
Kandi obwiro butwararaga njala tugiesara kwabagure mwaka gwa 1997 bakabonabona ubulemo bakahoyoma barakwenda skulu bakabalaga kitabo kibabura ndugi bakala kubonabona.
How can I, Lord? How can I help them out of this situation?
While everything around him was disintegrating, war could not destroy Hannington's commitment to effective stewardship.
The Lord spoke to my heart about putting into practice what I had learned at the International Steward Workshop. I had been taught that everything we have belongs to God. So even in this refugee camp, God has put abundant resources for his work. So I called upon the believers to start sharing what they have with the needy.
Kuruga Bishop Hannington Bahemuka akutuleteraga bageni batwegesia kigambo kyokugaba.
In the camps, we started a campaign to provide blankets to the orphans, and it was the first time we saw the principles come to life.
Niwaga bali kurungi nkamumanya nanga kanyambatina ku.
After 2 miserable years in captivity, it was safe to return home to Bundibujo, only to find that all had been destroyed.
The houses had been torn down, the farms had nothing in them, churches had been demolished, schools were devastated, so we started from scratch.
Tukaba tuli omukasomya komuhito okubonabona n'amajunega kaniye hawe ebizibu ebituli nabyo mu makanisa abantu kyabangwera kuhayo sente.
The need seemed too great, leaving the people asking the all too common question, how can the people from the West help us? However, Hannington inspired his people to ask a different question.
I asked, how soon can my people rise to the challenge of funding not only their immediate needs, but their futures as well? I told the people at that time that God has given us everything we need to rebuild our community. And what he needed was others to make themselves available to him, and he was going to use us. And those of us who are mechanics, those of us who are business people, they can use their gifts and the trade that they have to build their community.
He taught us about giving, and through that, the pastors went around teaching. So through that, the message was spread.
Anagu dumbi na tuwa mkwati ya mukama nenku bisanja kantigie sio na kolaki dumbi obutwagulie nyanya mtu kwera mtu bare kitoko bare.
One by one, person by person, the idea caught on, and before they knew it, the town was being transformed.
We began to rebuild our churches, provided homes and schooling for the orphans, and the needs of the people were met.
The people understood that they needed to create wealth in order to allow for tangible generosity. By using their God-given gifts and resources they already possessed, a cycle of sustainability was established.
We have a lady in our church. She is lame, but one day we were calling upon people to bring their gifts to come and build a church.
Katanika bakageba tia kwesa mtima wanje kina yankoko mana wanje kamwibia kamwaya abo mana wanje ne kanisha foto yamba.
And today the church she worships in is made of bricks. And we look at that as a wonderful example of gracious giving.
Children of the earth.
Tingisie kavo kandi tukwegua gantu yagonjera kimwe korera ruhanga mukiaro engabanija yatungo kutukari.
And this message can work in every situation, in every country, because surely generosity is transformational.
Out of the jungle of war and destruction, one pioneer leader, inspired by generosity, shared the vision with his community. No longer waiting for outside relief, the grace of giving has replaced a welfare mentality, and an entire town was rebuilt.
I get touched. That woman that crawls along the ground gave her only chicken. And it just reminds me of Jesus and the widow. The widow in the scripture, in my view, is the most celebrated donor in all of history. 2 little pennies. And Jesus brought his disciples to the colonnades of the temple, didn't he? And had them peer around and watch. And he used that woman as an example to all of us. And an interesting thing that's not in the story is Jesus didn't run up to the woman and say, "That's okay, darling. Keep your pennies. You need them. And wow, here's a couple of things more." We don't see that in the story at all. What we do see is him, Jesus, teaching all of us to celebrate her in her giving and to encourage that. That's a true story. It's a real story. That woman did give her chicken, and that's the shift that we're talking about here. What would have been the easier thing for Hannington? Come to the West? $100,000 request or something. Hey, we got to build our, we got to get some businesses started here. Got to get our farm started. Can you set up a loan pool? You can picture, I would have been part of it. I would have listened to the pitch. I would have said, wow, that makes sense. Look at these poor people, these refugees. We got to shift our mind into what Hannington discovered. I was in Nepal on Saturday when they have church there, and I watched the offering being taken, and people came forward with chickens and various produce and things that they had. And then right after church, which was Saturday, and it was market day in the village, the pastor went out behind the church, laid out a blanket, and put all the stuff that had just been brought in to the offering and sold it. And that's what ran the church for the week. And that kind of stuff is why we can talk with confidence about local fundraising. Because the stewardship's there already. It's just building on it, helping people understand. 15 years ago, I was in Costa Rica for a year. I was down there because my boss decided I didn't have enough cross-cultural mission experience to be that good of a grant maker. I somewhat disagreed with him, but he was my boss, so I'm in Costa Rica. My whole family's in Costa Rica, and I'm with a guy named John Huffman. Some of you may know him, Christ for the City. And Huffy had been a missionary down there 30 years. Established a lot of different programs. So he was mentoring me in what's it like to be a missionary? What are the things you go through? How do you live your life for a year? It was just a little taste. It wasn't the complete dive in, but I learned a lot in that year from him. And I was in exchange helping him with some organizational development. So early on in the year that I was there, he took me to a businessman's lunch that they'd been doing for over 20 years in their downtown center there in San Jose. And while we got there early so they could set up, and this was a lunch that had gone on every Wednesday at noon for 20 years. And as we were sitting there and the people were driving up. They were driving up in BMWs, Mitsubishi SUVs, Mercedes-Benzes, and they all had, this is 15 years ago, brick-sized cell phones. You know, and they snapped those down on the table in front of them to show that they may have to take an important call. I suspected some of them had their secretary call them during that time just to prove that, oh, sorry guys, you know, I've got to do some business. And it looked every bit like I was in Newport Beach, California. And so the businessmen had been at this long enough, and it was a Bible study, that they actually led the study themselves. And Christ for the City just sort of set the stage for them and gave them the space. We go back to the office after this, and the Christ for the City team sitting around the table, and I asked them, you know, how much money do you raise here in the country for your annual budget? And I think the number was something like $4,000 or $5,000. The pyramid was upside down at Christ for the City. The country's budget was probably about $300,000. They had a number of programs. And I said, what about these businessmen? Do you raise money from them? And they said, no. And I asked them this question: don't you respect them? Don't you respect these guys enough to ask them to help out in the work? And Oscar Vera, a Colombiano, he looked at me and he went, you're right. We don't. We haven't. It was like a light bulb had gone off just with that question in his mind. And he was the staff member responsible for this lunch. And within 3 weeks, he had organized a breakfast at a very nice hotel. And he brought me out and trotted me out as Exhibit A in saying, this is a North American, this is where we've been getting the money, and these guys are tired. And he did the pitch, and he said to them, we need to be taking care of our own programs here. And he listed out a lot of their programs. Those businessmen, that morning, one breakfast raised $30,000. And now, those businessmen own the work, Christ for the City, in Costa Rica at around $300,000 a year. All of it, except a smattering of funds from the U.S., raised in Costa Rica from Costa Ricans in cash. And here's where the technique thing got me. I had no idea, but in Costa Rica in 1995-96, there was no Visa cards. There were no checking accounts. There weren't bank transfers. It was a complete cash economy. When you wanted to pay your light bill, you went to the local grocery store and you put out your colones and you got a little receipt. If the newspaper wanted to be paid, they came to your door on a scooter and knocked on your door and you paid them. And so the way the businessmen gave the money, the actual process of getting the money, was they the Christ for the City office would call them up, make an appointment. Somebody'd go over there on a motor scooter. They'd go to their wall safe, take out a wad of colones and give it to them, get a receipt, and that was it. That's how the money was raised. I couldn't have taught that in a million years. It would have never occurred to me. The handful of rice, the misos. Well known in the South Asian context, particularly in North India, Northeast India. I mean, lots of folks do that. I couldn't have taught that. So how it works in your own setting is up to you to discover. Let's just work through the principles.